What are we discussing on today's podcast? Well, we got to break down the good and the bad from the series against the Washington Nationals. Then we got to do a little preview for the next series against the Miami Marlins, all on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast.
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. If you want to see more content by me, just follow me on Twitter at CreatorThomas24 for my personal account, or just look up Locked on Diamondbacks on Twitter, Instagram for the podcast handle. And of course, thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free and available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. One of those platforms is YouTube, trying to hit 500 subscribers before the end of May, so please hit subscribe on the Locked on Diamondbacks YouTube channel. But for the YouTube audience, if you guys are wondering why my background looks different, it's because I'm currently recording this podcast on my vacation from my normal day job. I am on the island of Oahu. I am in Hawaii. I am on the beach of Waikiki recording this podcast for y'all because the grind never stops. And honestly, after watching this weekend series against the Washington Nationals, I was like, you know what? I think I have to record a podcast because the D-backs, they could have completed the job, the mission of sweeping this Nationals team as they should have done, because the D-backs, I think, were clearly better than this Washington Nationals team from games 1, 2, and 3. But the D-backs only end up taking 2 out of 3 because the bullpen is starting to show some signs of being overtaxed. We saw them with a comeback on Saturday with a little bit of a collapse before the D-backs were able to rally in the bottom of the ninth. Then the Nationals were actually able to complete the comeback today and beat the D-backs in the series finale to avoid the sweep, because the D-backs should have swept that lowly Washington Nationals squad. The D-backs should be 5 games above 500 right now, but instead they're 19-15 and still in second place in the NL West. But before we get to the sadness and the disappointment from this weekend series against the Washington Nationals, because let's not forget the D-backs did take 2 out of 3, but there's some stuff that I want to hit on that I was not a big fan of from this series. But let's first talk about the good from this series, because it's easy to talk about the bad with the recency bias of losing Sunday's finale. But overall, this was a good series for the D-backs, because the D-backs offense did show some great signs of life. They only scored 3 runs in that first game, but 8 runs on Saturday. And then in Sunday's finale, you were able to get another 8 runs. So the D-backs were able to put up some runs in this series. So you'd like to see that. And when you think about the dudes that are putting in work for the runs, specifically the last 2 games, I mean, Lourdes Gurriel has been on fire for this Arizona Diamondbacks team. And the last 2 games of the series, in Sunday's game, let's first start with Saturday's game, because he was the hero on Saturday, able to tie the game up in the bottom of the 9th inning. Gurriel has just been on fire recently. He tied it up in the bottom 9th inning on Saturday, because that was on pace to be such a demoralizing loss, maybe the worst loss of the season for the D-backs. Maybe we could say that about Sunday's game, but Lourdes Gurriel, he hits the the tying home run in the bottom of the 9th on Saturday. And then his very next at bat on Sunday, another home run. Gurriel, just by himself, like I was thinking about this, like if you just told me right now just how it's played out so far this season, if you told me the D-backs traded Dalton Varsho for Lourdes Gurriel straight up, I'd be like, you know what? That's probably a fleece by the D-backs, because Lourdes Gurriel has been so good for the team this year. And slash line now after Sunday's game, Gurriel is batting .310 with .363 OBP and a .522 slugging. Like, Gurriel has been insane for the D-backs this year. And if you look at his last 10 games, not including Sunday's game, he's batting .387 with 1132 OPS. So it's like this guy Gurriel has been just insane for the D-backs this year, and vice versa. Dalton Varsho, like, once again, a slow start from him at the beginning of the season, around a 230 average, a 640 OPS. Like, we know about the slow starts for Dalton Varsho. We know he's a big second-half player, but with Gurriel playing the way he is right now, like, we couldn't have waited for that Dalton Varsho slow start to get up. Like, Gurriel is hot to begin the season right now, and he's a big part and a big cog of this D-backs offense, and he's been great to watch. He's brought great energy to this team. We all love the purple hair, and he's just been so much fun to watch. He's been so clutch for this D-backs team. He's been really a great addition. The fact that, like I just said, Varsho for Gurriel is a fleece. The fact that the D-backs got Moreno too in that deal as the headliner, like Gurriel's not even the headliner, Moreno is, like, that's a criminal trade by Mike Hazen, because I had to highlight that, because it's also on in Sundays in the Sundays games of baseball. Paul Goldschmidt also had 3 home runs. So we got to see the best of the Mike Hazen trades with the Gurriel and the Moreno this past weekend. And then Paul Goldschmidt also reminded us this is why we don't trade franchise stars. But you know who we replaced Paul Goldschmidt with? The next guy I want to talk about, Christian Walker, because he also had a fantastic series. In Saturday's game, Christian Walker went 3 for 5, 2 runs scored. And then in Sunday's game, Christian Walker had a home run, his 8th of the season. Christian Walker, I think, is on pace for 40 home runs now. And we've talked about how he's been playing the last 12, 13 games. Christian Walker has been insane. The power is back. He's hitting it, spraying it over all fields. And when Christian Walker is playing like this, it just takes the D-backs offense to another level. The D-backs have another ceiling because, I mean, if you look at last year's team, like Christian Walker and I guess Dalton Varsho, they're really only 2 power bats. Like Christian Walker had his near 40 home runs, 36. Dalton Varsho at 27. Then after that, it's kind of a big drop off to the next power bat. And with Dalton Varsho no longer in the lineup, like after Walker, who's the second biggest power bat in the lineup? Is it Gurriel? Is it Corbin Carroll? Like, it's a big drop off in terms of just raw power after Christian Walker. So when he's swinging the bat like this and he's going over the fence and he's bringing home multiple runs and multiple RBIs, like, he is one of the best values in Major League Baseball, one of the best deals that the D-backs have had during the Mike Hazen era. So I think everyone is just absolutely in love with Christian Walker. Also, just want to continue to highlight Dominic Fletcher, because this guy just gets hit in every game plays in. Saturday, he went 2 for 3. And then Sunday's game, he also went 2 for 4. So it's like, this guy's insane. Like, I don't understand how he's such a good hitter, how he's so advanced beyond his years. Like, why did we wait this long to call him up? Like, it seemed like this guy, Dominic Fletcher, maybe he's the missing piece of the outfield. Like, I still want to hope it's Alec Thomas or a Jake McCarthy, but maybe it's just you just ride the Corbin Carroll, Dominic Fletcher, Lourdes Gurriel trio in your outfield, because that trio seems to be working at an elite level right now, offensively, defensively. That trio is getting it done. So I love Dominic Fletcher. I want to highlight him. Then the last guy I want to highlight from this series was just Tommy Henry, because he pitched pretty well on Saturday. He went 6 innings, 2 earned runs, 2 walks, 3 Ks, only 75 pitches thrown, and it was a quality start for Tommy Henry. Like we've talked about, this D-backs rotation doesn't always have a lot of quality starts, and we need our pitchers to go deeper into these ball games. And Tommy Henry is someone that doesn't always do that for this D-backs team, but he was able to do it in Saturday's game. And remember, this guy was called up to replace a Madison Bumgarner, who was a big struggle for the D-backs this year. So to see Tommy Henry go in there, 6 innings, 2 earned runs, like, that's not something I can count on from a Madison Bumgarner. I'm not sure he could have given the D-backs that kind of quality start. I don't know if he would have ever given the D-backs a quality start this season. So I like that start from Tommy Henry, and I just want to highlight it. So shout out Tommy Henry for giving the D-backs a quality start and saving the bullpen just a little bit, even though they still had a collapse, which I want to talk about in segment number 2, the bullpen and the rotation. But before we get to that topic, I first want to talk to you guys about eBay Motors, because like the D-backs bullpen, you need the right pieces in your bullpen to make everything fit. And if you don't have the right pieces for your car, then your car just won't run, I guess, right? Because for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to my garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay guaranteed fit only, available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right. Let's get back into the podcast and let's discuss some negatives from this series against the Washington Nationals, because really my biggest negative is what we saw in the last two games, right? Because Saturday's game easily could have been the worst loss of the season for the D-backs, or at least in the running, because I was at Four Peaks. I was vibing Saturday night. The Lakers were on. I'm a big Lakers fan. I'm sorry, Suns fans, if you're an all Valley guy listening to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. I get it. I'm a big Lakers guy. So my Lakers were crushing the Golden State Warriors. I was feeling good. I look over to the TV. The D-backs are up like 3 runs on the Washington Nationals. I'm like, my teams are looking good. Everything's going according to plan. Like, their 8th inning just wrapped up. The D-backs were up 6-2. Like, there was nothing for me to worry about. The D-backs were up 4 runs. I was feeling nice. I go back to eating my food. I go back to drinking my beer, watching LeBron on the big screen. The Lakers game is wrapping up. They're blowing it out. Then I turn back around, look at the D-backs score. I'm like, whoa. How is it all of a sudden a 1-run game where the Nationals are bringing the tying run to the plate, and then all of a sudden, wait a minute, are the D-backs down right now in the 9th inning? Because the 9th inning was a meltdown and a collapse for the D-backs in Saturday's game, because you had who started off for the D-backs bullpen. Well, first you had Scott McGough, who is always Scott McGough is always culprit number 1, right? Scott McGough has blown multiple leads this season. There's been countless times you can look at D-backs losses or games that the D-backs almost lost, like this game, because of Scott McGough, because he came in. He gave up 2 earned runs, including a home run. Scott McGough loves to give up hard contact, loves to give up over the fence power, and now his ERA after Saturday's game was a 5.87. So not very good, and I wish I could say it's a surprise, but McGough just hasn't been that effective for the D-backs this year after having like decent expectations for him. I'm not saying I was expecting, the next Koji Arihara coming from Japan, even though, Scott McGough is not Japanese, but the point still stands, and McGough hasn't even really been that serviceable, hasn't really been that effective, and he's really been holding back this D-backs bullpen, and I think it's starting to bleed into other guys trying to pick up the slack, because then Andrew Chafin, the sheriff, who has been pretty darn good for the D-backs this season. Yeah, he's had a couple outings that's been a little shaky, but for the most part, Andrew Chafin has been a reliable guy, and he was not even able to record an out, because every time I looked up, he's giving up doubles, and he even gave up a home run. He gave up 3 earned runs and 4 hits, and Andrew Chafin just did not look like himself, and it felt like the game was over. It felt like it was going to be a big demoralizing loss, but then no, in the bottom of the 9th inning, Coach Gurriel was able to tie it up. D-backs were able to get some runners on board. And then you had Pavin Smith with a walk-off walk. I didn't even talk about that. The first walk-off of the D-back season was on Saturday, so you'd love to see that. But then in Sunday's game, it felt like deja vu, because once again, the D-backs were doing pretty good. After 7 innings, the D-backs were up 8-5. Then after 8 innings, the D-backs were up 8-6. But you're like, you know what? Going to the 9th, I'm still up 2 runs. I still have a great chance to win this ball game, and everything just fell apart in that 9th inning, because Miguel Castro, who is also been phenomenal for the D-backs, he gave up a 3-run bomb in the inning. The Nationals were able to come back, and it just feels like with this D-backs rotation really struggling to give the D-backs length and quality starts. Like, the D-backs in the National League they're 5th in terms of innings pitched per game started. D-back starters only average 5.1 innings pitched per game. And when you think about Zach Gallen averaging like almost 7 innings pitched per game, Kelly's probably at like another 6. Like, that means everyone else not named Gallen and Kelly are probably averaging like 3 innings pitched per start, which is really gross and really disgusting. And I think it's starting to take wear and tear on the bullpen. I think you're starting to see the bullpen crack a little bit and the foundation starting to crumble a little bit, because You have guys going multiple innings, and I don't know if they're able to do it because they're going multiple innings, not just consecutively in a week. They're going multiple innings in just one outing because we saw Kyle Nelson pitch 2/3 of an inning on Saturday and then come in and pitch another inning and a third on Sunday. And then also you got Andrew Chafin. How hard has he been worked? It feels like Scott McGough pitches a lot of games because he's that needed in the bullpen. Like Miguel Castro came in both Saturday and Sunday's game. And when you only have 4 or 5 guys that you actually trust, sometimes you go to those guys too often. And maybe that's been the case with some of our top dudes recently, and they're getting a little bit overtaxed. And so this D-backs rotation greatly needs to start picking up the slack after Gallen and Kelly, because I think the bullpen, for the most part, has been solid this year. It's still not the best bullpen in Major League Baseball. It's still probably average or below average. But considering where we come from the bullpen the last few years, since I've started the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, the D-backs have had arguably the worst bullpen in Major League Baseball. All these Mike Hazen offseason signings in the bullpen have just been really bad since I've taken over this podcast. I think this past offseason, he made some decent signings of the bullpen. I do think Andrew Chafin is better than the 4.26 ERA he currently has after Saturday's outing. I think Miguel Castro has pitched better than the outing he had on Sunday. I think Colin Nelson's good, even though he wasn't signed by Mike Hazen this offseason. Of course, Scott McGough didn't work out, but I think he at least added 2 quality arms to the bullpen, and the Chafin's and the Castros, with the Mantiplis and Colin Nelson's already pitching well. You pray that Kevin Ginkel can get back on track, but at least have 4 dudes who trust in the bullpen, which feels like a long time since then. But D-backs still need another guy or two back there that could hopefully pick up the slack. Maybe a guy like Carlos Vargas could finally turn it around. This guy, Ruiz, I think has actually been solid for the D-backs recently. I would have to look up his most recent stats, but most of these bullpen guys, not too many guys we could trust. If the D-backs are able to find another guy in the bullpen that they could trust, maybe a Dre Jameson's able to work it out in Reno, could put him in the bullpen. Maybe once Zach Davies gets healthy, someone like Tommy Henry or Ryan Nelson could be good for the bullpen. But as it stands now, the rotation outside Gallen and Kelly need to go deeper into the ball games because it's bleeding into the bullpen, and we need more bullpen arms to step up as well. So it's a two-sided coin where 2 areas that are struggling are definitely affecting each other, because also, like, when a rotation starter is struggling a little bit, sometimes you're like, you know what, we might lose this game anyway. Even if he's given up 4 earned runs in the first 2 innings, let him just go 5 or 6 innings because we can't tax the bullpen once again. So it's all intermingled between the rotation and the bullpen. And at the end of the day, both of them need to be upgraded probably a little bit for this D-backs team to really contend and have a chance this season. But as it currently stands, it's decent. It's fine. The rotation and bullpen is not good enough to win a World Series, but maybe it's good enough to win enough games to make the wild card round, especially when we have Gallen and Kelly pitching like they do, and the full bullpen guys that you do have they trust. That's probably enough to scrap it together with glue and paste for a whole season just to be decent in that 80 win mark. But if you have serious aspirations like the D-backs keep telling us with a sense of urgency in this season, then you definitely have to upgrade either the bullpen or the rotation for this D-backs team to really compete this season. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the D-backs next series against the Miami Marlins, because the D-backs played the Marlins one time already. And I don't know if you remember this, but the D-backs' first series loss of the season was actually to the Miami Marlins, because just a quick recap, the D-backs split their first series against the Dodgers, split their next series against the Padres, then beat the Dodgers, then beat the Brewers, and then in that 5th series, I believe, against the Miami Marlins, they lost 2 out of 3. But when you do look at that series against the Marlins, the first game 1, the first loss, Madison Bumgarner's on the mound. He's not going to be there anymore. In game 2, the D-backs lost 3-2, where offense wasn't really able to get it done. Then they won the series finale with Zach Gallen on the mound versus Sandy Alcantara. And for the D-backs, you're going to have Zach Gallen on the mound in game 1, Fott in game 2, and then Merrill Kelly in game 3. So you're potentially going to get your 3 best starters out there. We'll see about Brandon Fott, but as it currently stands, he's just as good as a Tommy Henry or Ryan Nelson, who's also in the rotation. Maybe Tommy Henry's the best of the 3 with how he's pitching right now, but Brandon Fott still has a ton of upside, and this is actually a great opportunity for Brandon Fott to maybe get back on track after his rough debut this past week, because the Miami Marlins are one of the worst teams in Major League Baseball when it comes to offense. So it gives Brandon Pfaadt potentially a good opportunity to have a little bit of bounce back and maybe grow some confidence. And at least maybe he still goes 5 innings and gives up like 4 earned runs, but maybe he strikes out like 8 people in that outing and at least can build some confidence in that way. Because if you look at the National League right now, Marlins are 9th in average, which is actually pretty solid, but 14th in OPS with a 681 and runs scored. They're dead last in the National League. No one scores less runs than the Marlins. They're 12th in home runs. So you don't really have to worry about power. You don't really have to worry about them like scoring on you. You don't really have to worry about like them getting on base that much. So it's like for the Miami Marlins, like their offense really hasn't been that good. There's really like one dude in their lineup really producing right now, and that is Luis Arias with a 430 batting average and a 1016 OPS in 30 games. So the dude is legit. That trade has worked out for them so far. Pablo Lopez for Luis Arias for the Minnesota Twins. Now Lopez, I think, I don't even have his numbers off the top of my head, but I know the rest of the rotation has been struggling for the Miami Marlins. So maybe a Pablo Lopez would do good for that rotation right now. But Arias has been fantastic for the Miami Marlins this year. I love Jed Chisholm. I got him on a bunch of fancy teams. But right now, his slash line is good. He's batting 223 with a 663 OPS, but he's still got the 5 home runs. He's got 11 stolen bases. He's a dynamic player you need to watch out for. But the rest of the lineup just doesn't scare me when it comes to Miami Marlins. That's why when I did those preseason podcasts with Sully Baseball and he thought the Marlins were better than the Arizona Diamondbacks, like I was kind of offended because I was like, yes, the Marlins rotation is probably better than the D-backs rotation, but the rest of the team just not better because they just start so many dudes. Like they start Gurriel, who is probably their second best player at 39 years old, maybe their third best player. Like Gene Segura is cooked. He's playing. They got Jorge Soler. He's probably a little bit over the fence, even though he's still a power bat. They just got some dudes in that lineup who I'm just like, how is this guy an everyday major leaguer for you? And the strength of the Miami Marlins team entering the season was supposed to be the rotation. And so far, the rotation has been very underwhelming so far for the Miami Marlins this year. Whenever I try to say Miami Marlins, it's just like a big tongue twister for me, that double M. Maybe I should just say Marlins or Miami because Miami, you got Jesus Luzardo. He's performed very well. And during the offseason, whoa, that was the window next to me. I don't know why it makes that noise every now and then, but this past offseason, I talked about, like, I wouldn't have been upset if the D-backs wanted to trade one of their extra outfielders, like Alec Thomas for Jesus Luzardo, because Luzardo, 25 years old, middle of his prime, really hasn't had a chance to prove himself on the big league level over a sustained period because he's always dealt with injuries or something. And I felt like Alec Thomas for Jesus Luzardo, I wouldn't have been mad. The D-backs need more rotation help. And honestly, like, if the D-backs are able to pull off trade like that, like, imagine if you had Fletcher, Carroll, McCarthy, and Gurriel in your outfield, and then you had a Gallen, Luzardo, Merrill Kelly, 1, 2, 3, and then potentially still either have Pfaadt or Nelson or Dre Jameson or Davies in your rotation, like that D-backs team is probably even better. But Luzardo's been the best Miami Marlins pitcher this year. Sandy Alcantara, Sully Baseball says it's Alcantara. I don't know. I read Alcantara when I see his name on Baseball Reference. He hasn't been that good this year. I got him on a fantasy team, a 5.09 ERA. Edward Cabrera hasn't been that good. Braxton Garrett. Those are the 3 pitchers, I believe. Let me see. I have my D-backs probable pitchers pulled up right here. Game 1, Braxton Garrett versus Zach Gallen. Like, Garrett has a 5.81 ERA this year, and you're going against Zach Gallen. Like, the D-backs have to win Game 1. Whenever Zach Gallen's pitching, I feel like the D-backs have to win because Gallen is more than likely going to look superhuman. Game 2 is really going to be I think Game 2 is the swing game in this series because I want to say the D-backs are heavy favorites in the game that Gallen and Merrill Kelly pitch, but still these D-backs, still these Miami Marlins pitchers are talented. So if a Braxton Garrett goes off or Edward Cabrera versus Merrill Kelly goes off, like I'm not going to be surprised, but I think that Game 2 is really the momentum swing in the series because I think the D-backs win Game 1, but Game 2 has Jesus Luzardo, who I just mentioned, as the best Marlins pitcher this year, versus Brandon Pfaadt. Like, that's going to be a huge game. If the Marlins can tie up the series after Game 2, then go into that series finale. Merrill Kelly versus Edward Cabrera, anything's possible. Of course, I'm thinking Merrill Kelly, who has a 2.75 ERA this year, has been dynamite with Gallen once again. Arguably the best 1-2 duo in Major League Baseball from a frontline rotation. Like, put some respect on those two names because they are absolutely fantastic for the D-backs this season. And I got to do an updated power ranking of the best duos, the best frontline duos in Major League Baseball, because I honestly think Gallen and Merrill Kelly are right there with anyone. And you have to do it right now in the moment, because, like, if you're talking about right now, like, could you put Scherzer and Verlander on there? I don't know. Verlander is always hurt. So is Scherzer. Like, Tristan McKenzie and Shane Bieber. Like, McKenzie's been hurt this year. Like, I would have to think about some other teams off the top of my head. Like, Cole and Rodon could be up there, but Rodon's been hurt the whole year. So I would have to go through all Major League Baseball. Like, Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler's probably on that list. But why shouldn't Gallen and Kelly be like a top 5 better rotation duo in Major League Baseball? It's a real question I would have to have. But I am looking at Game 2, Luzardo versus Brandon Pfaadt, as the swing game in this series. Brandon Pfaadt wanted to see him get back on his horse. Struggled in Game 1 in his debut, but going against the Miami Marlins team who offensively does not do much. The D-backs have already played the Marlins once this year, and the Marlins were able to take 2 out of 3 against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Hopefully, the D-backs can get back on track. The D-backs offense didn't do a ton in that first series against the Marlins. They only scored 3 runs in the first 2 games before scoring 5 against Alcantara in the series finale. So hopefully the D-backs offense can do a little bit more, and their pitching can keep this Marlins offense at bay, because this offense is the worst arguably in the National League. So if you let this Marlins offense go off, I'm going to be really upset. But with Gallen, Kelly, and Pfaadt all going 1, 2, 3, I feel pretty good about the D-backs' chances in this upcoming series. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. Hopefully, I'll be here tomorrow. Again, I'm on vacation. I'm in Hawaii, so might have to play this day by day. But thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. Make your second listen of the day the Locked On MLB podcast with my friend Silly Baseball. Don't forget, you catch every D-backs pitch on our hometown broadcast on the SiriusXM app when you search up Diamondbacks. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.